How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to Resurrection of the Overmind. This is day 4, and I'm coming back after a long work week. I've had, I think, 4 or 5 days off from this project, and I'm ready to get back on it. If you're a little hazy about what has happened up until now, like I am currently, go and check out the previous episodes. I don't know why you'd start here, but don't do it, man. Go and watch the previous episodes. But now that you have done that, because you paused the video like a good little YouTuber, we are at the point, or we are still in part of troubleshooting and stress testing hardware. So we rebent, or we straightened out, ideally, all of the CPU pins from the 8350 and the the Phenom 2 X4, and we are running the 8350 in the system currently. It is running on the monitor that you can see behind me. And I was stress testing with Prime 95 near the end of the last episode, or halfway through, depending on how you look at it, and the machine was crashing. Just spontaneously rebooting after a few minutes of stress testing. No errors, nothing to help us out. So doing all the typical searches on Tom's Hardware, Linus Tech Tips Forum, AnandTech, all those places, the general consensus looks like it's a power issue, but that could come from several different places. That could be the power supply itself giving out. That could be the motherboard not being able to supply enough power to the CPU, because this new CPU is more powerful and, in theory, more power hungry. I haven't confirmed that via the specs, but another option is that I remember a whole Linus Tech Tips Forum thing. Please don't quote me, I could be mistaken, but testing with Prime 95 is somewhat dangerous. It can be if you don't do it right, or you do it too long, and Prime 95 is actually capable of causing your CPU to draw more power than its protected maximum. So it can cause your motherboard to cause the system to crash because it can't supply enough power on that power delivery system. So they, over at Linus Tech Tips, I believe, have switched to using a piece of software called IDA 64, which does not have that same issue. It uses a different testing method, and it actually is capable of testing the whole system. So I've actually went and downloaded the trial version of that, and let's take a look at it. All right, so I am running IDA 64 on the computer right now. Obviously, the trial version is noted here, but that's cool. I've got 30 days. I started the stress test. This is horrible. Screen capture, nah. Stressing the CPU, the FPU, I'm not quite sure what that is. I'm not nerdy enough. The cache and the system memory, RAM. I'm not testing the GPU because there isn't any reason to do that except for power, total power delivery, but Prime 95 wasn't testing the GPU as far as I know, so that shouldn't be an issue for this stress test. But hey, we've got the software in trial version. Step 2, maybe we'll test the rest of those components as well as the system disks. I'm not testing. I skipped that, sorry. I started this test about 15 minutes ago, just a little bit over, and we're still running strong. And the Prime 95 test did not last that long. So that's looking good. I'm going to let this system cook for a little bit. If this works, it likely means that there isn't actually an issue with the system, and the system was crashing simply because of the Prime 95 issue that we talked about earlier. If that is the case, I'm going to be pretty happy. Don't need to buy any more hardware. I can return the ASRock motherboard that is chilling here. I'm still considering just keeping it because I've got it here and I've already paid for it, and the return process isn't that hard, but I mean, it's something to do. I'm considering keeping it, but we will see. So, with the stress test, I'm going to let this guy cook for hopefully another 45 minutes or so. Let it go for an hour, just as a preliminary test. Where's our temperatures here? Oh, actually right above it. We are currently at 46 degrees, which is okay. These have a max temperature, these AMD chips, of about 60. That's your thermal maximum. If you hit that, alarm bells are going to go off and things are going to start exploding after a while. So we're looking pretty good, and I will come back in about 45 minutes, and hopefully the system will still be running. All right, so we are about an hour and 15 minutes into the stress test, and we are still going strong. The CPU temp is holding at about 49-50 degrees Celsius, which is fantastic. 10 degrees below the thermal limit, and the computer is still running with the fans on low speeds. So I am pretty thrilled with this. I'm going to let it cook for another couple hours, and eventually I will engage the GPU stress test for total power draw, and we'll see how man, I'm getting all tongue-tied. We'll see how we do with that as far as power and temperature is concerned. It is difficult to see, but on the CPU window, we are at 4.05 gigahertz, which is great, which means we are not thermal throttling or anything. That is the full speed. I don't think the 8350 has a boost clock necessarily like Intel CPUs do, but we are doing pretty good. So I'm pretty happy with Ada 64, unless it seems like it's doing its job, and Prime 95 was just a strange fluke that was messing with our test results. But I'm going to let it cook for a little bit more, and we'll see how we do. All right, so I just came back in the room, and the computer actually did restart about an hour and 45 minutes into the stress test. So that does help us out a little bit in determining what the course of the issue is. Wow, that's kind of boring. Let's look at me. So we are going to need to do some additional testing and figure out using more specialized tests and some diagnosis troubleshooting methodology to determine what actually is the source of the issue with the hardware. Alright, so now that we've discovered that the machine is indeed still crashing, even with testing via IDA 64, CPU and RAM only, we are going to start going through some basic testing and troubleshooting steps in a step-by-step basis using the tools and hardware that we can get without spending any money. It makes sense to go through that first, as well as maintaining logical order regarding how the computer works. So the first part of the hardware that we're going to test is the memory. Right now on the screen behind me, it looks like a blue screen of death, but it is not. That is actually the memtest 86 readout window. It is going, let me spin around here. So now the lighting is horrible, but I can see the monitor. So far, no errors or anything like that, which is good. I just started it 5 seconds ago. But that will allow us to ensure that the memory is operating fine. I'm going to let that run for, I don't know, 12 hours or so, as long as I can get it to run, hopefully without crashing. If the machine crashes, it'll probably just reboot, and I'll end up on the Windows login screen like it did before. So I'm going to test the memory, which is pretty easy to test like we're doing now. After that, I'm going to swap all of the critical components. Hey, why am I so dark? Come on, camera. A little bit better. I'm going to test all of the critical components, such as the CPU, RAM, graphics card, power supply on the new motherboard. Doing that would allow us to determine whether or not the power delivery system on board the motherboard has actually been damaged and worn down over time. I was overclocking the Phenom 2 old processor chip, and so with that I was overvolting it, so it's possible that over time I was stressing the power delivery system too much and it's just not able to handle it. So if that is the case, and our memory test is successful, and then the motherboard test with the ASRock motherboard from Amazon is successful, then we're good to go. We know that the old motherboard's power delivery system is shot, and it's as easy as that. If that is not the case, I will acquire a power supply to test all of the components with, both on the new motherboard and the old motherboard. I'll start with the new one because all of the components will be on there at some point. Unfortunately, the power supply I'll need to get is going to be pretty hefty, probably around $100 or so for a decent quality one. I wouldn't want anything powering my GTX 980 to be less than stellar quality. So, I think that's the basic testing for now. Let's see how far the mem test gets us. I'm probably going to leave it running for 24 hours or so. So, day 4 is actually going to be comprised of several days, but that's cool. I don't want you to have to watch a 3-minute video. Yep, the test is still going. So, stay tuned.
All right, so a little over 12 hours has passed since the start of this test, and as you can see on the screen, no errors were detected. We've had 3 complete passes, and everything is looking good. So, unfortunately, that means we now need to go on to the next test. All right, so I have booted back into Windows, and I'm starting up IDA64 again. But this time I'm going to stress the GPU as well as the CPU and the rest of the system, except the local disks. The purpose of this test is to determine what sort of power issue the system is having. If the issue is a motherboard power delivery system, this isn't going to have any difference in the relative timing of the system crashing, because the motherboard isn't delivering very much power to the GPU. All of that's coming straight from the CPU straight from the PSU through the 2 cables that connects directly to it. If it is a power supply issue, this test will probably crash a lot more quickly because we're drawing a lot more power with the GPU. But the CPU is still going to be stressed just as it was before. And remember, this test last time lasted about 1 hour and 45 minutes. So let me see if I can click the button while still keeping this on screen. Checking my settings, and we're good to go. Last time, there wasn't any immediate effect, but I'm hoping this one will be rather dramatic and just tank the system immediately. I guess that would be too easy. Let me pull up the GPU voltage, or maybe power is the thing that I should be looking at. CPU stuff. How does one access the temperatures for the GPUs that I have selected? I don't know. We can see down here in... Oh, okay. So that was good. That was much better. Only 30 seconds or so into the test, and the machine has at least somewhat crashed. I've still got a Windows cursor. Cool. That's interesting. That is not the same type of crash. Oh, okay, we're back. That's goofy. That could have been actually a graphics timeout related situation. How the thing thought the graphics card had crashed. The graphics driver installed on Windows thought the graphics card had crashed because it was being used so heavily. But we can see now on the... Boy, this is difficult. On this, it is no longer stressing the GPU. So it looks like the driver crashed, and we're going to need to update the driver settings so that it will not do that. Okay, in an effort to ensure that my tests are successful with stress testing the GPU, I'm updating the GeForce experience and then the subsequent video drivers that go along with that. So hopefully the computer will not crash while I'm doing this, or my Windows install is further borked, and testing with the GPU will be much more difficult. What could go wrong? Gosh darn it, GeForce Experience, why do I keep having to log into this thing? So as a cutaway from the main project, I've been wanting to start recording gaming videos again even while Overmind is still being worked on. So I set up this temporary editing workstation in my bedroom consisting of my 15-inch MacBook Pro, I think it's a mid-2015, and some basic peripherals just to get being able to edit these videos. But then I realized that the computer itself is probably powerful enough to run some of the average games that I play, maybe not the Crysis and the newer AAA titles graphics-wise, but at least get us recording some videos in an alternate location. So what I've done here, it's kind of hard to see because a lot of the components are black, but I have set up my MacBook Pro running Windows via an external USB SSD using a Windows to Go installer. The Boot Camp drivers were terribly difficult to install, but I just got it working. I'm doing some speed tests on the disks right now just to make sure that we're at usable speeds. I've only got the OS disk hooked up right now. Some basic peripherals. I've got my microphone chilling there. I have almost everything I need to record some basic videos. So this is looking pretty good so far. The unfortunate thing is everything is going to be hooked up via USB 3. So that's going to be a lot of working out how to balance the load on the two USB ports that the computer offers to get these components working at full speed. If this were a more permanent solution, I could do some Thunderbolt enclosures for not only several external hard drives in a single enclosure, but also they have a new device that allows you to hook up an external graphics card via Thunderbolt. So I could totally run my GTX 980 off of the Windows install on this computer. But those pieces of equipment are pretty expensive, and I would rather build a new Windows computer than pursue something like that. Right now, this is entirely a temporary solution, but so far we're looking good. I will keep you up to date on the progress. Alright, so in the process of hooking up my portable, quote-unquote, gaming station with my MacBook in the other room, I have to remove a couple of drives from this computer that I need for my recording process. The first of those drives is my scratch disk. That is the drive that all of the footage goes to and is edited off of. That one's fortunately easy to get to. I've got it in this hot swap drive bay here. It is a WD Black 1 terabyte drive. Here we go. That was easy enough. Unfortunately, the additional drives are going to be a bit more difficult. Remaining in this computer, I have two Samsung, I think they're 840 Pros, 840 Evos, I forget now. But they are mounted right here in the darkness. They are stacked on top of each other on a double stack drive sled meant for mounting 2.5 drives in a 3.5 slot. Unfortunately, with the form factor of this case, that means I have to remove this bar, which is holding the H100i radiator and the two fans from the machine to get those drives out. Okay, it looks like I only had 3 of 8 screws holding that bar in. That's a good thing to find out. But now we can just scoot this bar, slightly down the case, and I should have enough room to get these drives out. Alright, so I just got the drives out. Fortunately, everything went according to plan. This one is obviously the one that was on top, much more dusty. I believe the bottom one is the one that we need, but I'm just going to take both of them and plug them both in, see which is which, and then bring the other one back. Okay, I want to give you a quick overview of how I'm actually running this quote-unquote portable workstation and gaming station over in my bedroom. As you can see, I've got Windows 10 running on this MacBook, but I'm actually not using the internal SSD in it. I'm running it from the Windows to Go style of installation on a USB 3 external SSD. You can see it marked in orange tape here. The orange tape says my name and then 500 gigabyte 860 Evo, which is the Samsung drive installed in it. It's an Amazon generic USB 3 enclosure, is like $10. So I installed Windows to Go on that, installed my Boot Camp drivers, and now I'm booting the Mac from it, so it is all good to go. Regarding that, then I have just beyond it that stack of 250 gigabyte SSDs that were from Overmind. I plugged into one of them using a generic SATA and power to USB converter. to hook that up. What the bottom one there that is connected is my games drive for Steam and Good Old Games. The top one is the Overmind OS drive, but I'm not using it at the moment. I'll pull it off the sled. I'll pull one of them off the sled for further work with Overmind. Just beyond that, that is the WD Black 1 terabyte scratch disk that I use to record all my footage. It is hooked up via a similar device, except this one supplies power for 3.5-inch mechanical drives. So there's a wall wart that goes to a power supply, and then another USB 3 cable. All these devices are currently plugged in via a USB 3 hub to the MacBook. Unfortunately, USB 3 only offers up to 5 gigabit speed. If you don't know what that is, SATA, the connector that all of these drives use, is 6 gigabit, which is ridiculous. None of these drives are going to saturate that. But combined, I'm potentially seeing a throughput issue. Because the OS drive, we want as much speed to as possible. The games drive, for loading times, it'd be nice to have it be at full speed as well. But the scratch disk is only going to be taking 80 to 100, 120 megabytes per second. So what I may need to do is split some of these drives to another hub on the other USB port on the MacBook. I'm not even sure if those are separate USB controllers, so they may share the same bandwidth inside the computer anyways, but that's one more step that we can do to load balance and get enough bandwidth for these hard drives. Traditionally, we don't have to worry about this because the SATA controller in your computer's motherboard has its own bandwidth, and you're not competing with all your other USB devices. But I've also got my keyboard, my mouse/trackball, and then my audio interface, which is actually picking me up right now. Great. I think that's all the USB devices I will need. The rest of the recording system is in the computer using DxTory to capture everything and output it to the scratch disk that we can see back there that we talked about a minute ago. So we're almost finished installing Steam, which will be fantastic. And I can relate Steam to my games drive, get it to recognize my library again, and then we can do some tests as far as recording. I'm putting all the time into this portable setup because I really want to get recording videos for you guys again, and I'm thinking that Overmind is going to be a longer project. It's not something that I want to get halfway through and make decisions based on time. I'd rather make decisions based on the best outcome for everybody, regardless of the time spent acquiring the components or saving up for them or things like that. So hopefully this little project here with my ghetto Ethernet cables running everywhere will end up creating some wonderful gaming videos for you guys.
Alright, so I finished setting up the quote-unquote portable laptop workstation in the other room, and I finished recording a test video. It is rendering that now, and everything is looking good. So I'm moderately happy with that. The GPU in the thing is pretty weak, so it'll only be able to do the older, lower-end games, most of which you're used to. But for any of the slightly newer, higher-end ones like Crysis, for example, I'll need to wait until my main machine is up and running before I can record any of those. Now, update on the graphics driver issue. I was not able to update the actual graphics on the system, or the graphics driver on the system, and GeForce Experience was just not having it. I don't know why. Actually, I do know why. Scratch that. It claimed I'm already up to date, but IDA64 was still having the same issues that it was. It's probably a setting somewhere that I can tweak, but I'm moderately sure. I take that back. I'm still not sure which component it is, but I am going to go forward with testing the motherboard now because I have it on hand and I don't have to spend any additional funds to get a replacement power supply by testing the motherboard first. So that means I get to swap all of the components on and attach to the current motherboard onto the new one. It's going to be a little bit tricky because I'm just going to be setting the motherboard on the motherboard box on top of the case like I did last time for all the components to reach. I'm not sure if... Actually, that may not work because... Focus on my face. Come on, camera. It's the light behind me. I'm not sure if that is actually going to work because I need to get the H100i block onto the CPU. I need to do that instead of the stock cooler this time because if I'm going to be stress testing the system, I'm pretty sure a stock AMD cooler would cause the CPU to overheat under that kind of load. And the OS drive for this computer is still attached to the sled that is running the games drive on the laptop in the other room, so I will need to go and separate those two. Man, this project keeps getting more and more complicated. But such is life.
Okay, so I want to show you this relative to the entire case instead of the close-up that we had before. This is super jank ball. That is the technical term. So I've remounted the FX8350 in this board, attached the H100i. Luckily, I had already removed this bar and unscrewed it from the case to get access to the drives that were here, so it's real easy to just pull it out and set it here. I have connected the two main power cables, the 8-pin and the 24-pin there. I have moved all of our RAM over. I haven't installed the GPU yet. I'm going to do that shortly. I'm going to use that 9400 GT that I was testing with before, just for the same vertical structural reasons. And then I'm going to plug in my USB keyboard and mouse and see if the machine will post, after, of course, using my handy dandy screwdriver to jump the pins on the start button on the front panel header. So we are almost there. Okay. Wow, I just realized that this card had fallen over. Oops. Hold on. That was scary. I thought that GPU had like ripped out of the PCI slot, but that is not the case. It had just never locked in place. I didn't push it down hard enough because I was being too gentle with it. But we are good to go now. We have connected our couple of USB devices. The only thing I'm concerned about, besides the whole thing falling to its death, and ultimately my death, is the fans on the back of that radiator rubbing against something. You know, it's very... Well, this is a horrible angle, sorry. But I think we're good to go. So now I'm going to apply power, see if anything explodes. Ha! Step 1 complete. Nothing has exploded. Sorry, that's a horrible angle. Let me use my multi-bit screwdriver here and get my appropriate bit for jumping the connections here, and I believe it is this one here by my screwdriver. Yeah, that's a cool focus. Let me whip out the manual one last time to make sure I'm jumping the correct pins. Okay, I'm going to jump these pins. Sorry, I need to not look through the camera right now. Haha, got it first try. Oh, I need to apply power to that video monitor so we can see what's going on. The dog. Well, everything's turning on, but it's just this monitor that we're concerned with. Uh-oh, power save mode. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Aha! Azrock, yes! This is the first time I believe... Uh-oh, don't start doing something, buddy. Let me... Okay, hit a whole bunch of buttons so that we're not auto-booting into something. This is the first time that I've seen this board boot, actually. The last time was with the Phenom 2 chip, and all it did was beep and give me some BIOS errors. So I'm pretty thrilled right now that we have booted successfully into this motherboard. So now, I'm going to go through the BIOS, make sure it's detecting everything that it should, run and get my Samsung SSD boot drive, hook it up to this motherboard. Okay, so I have attached the boot SSD. Let's discard changes and exit and see if the machine will boot. Really? Sorry. Let's see if the machine will reboot and go into the OS. Sorry, just reading through things. I'm confused why I'm hitting exit, that I'm telling it to exit, and it's just coming right back to the BIOS. Maybe it still doesn't think there is a thing plugged into it. Let's shut the system down, turn it back on, and see if we can convince it to boot to the SSD. This is something I do not recommend doing at home, kids. Unless you too enjoy breaking computer hardware. In which case, please do as I do. Azrock. That's right. Yes, Windows. Well, again, we shouldn't be too excited about Windows, but it is a good step in the right direction. That's weird. Okay, cool. Okay, so we are back in IDA 64, and we are going to start the stress test now. We're going to stress the CPU and all the motherboard components, not the local disks and not the GPU, because I don't really think my 9400 GT is up to it. I don't know if you can hear it, but that fan is just kind of humming along. Something is obviously wrong with it. And if I were to stress it, it would probably explode. Which would be cool for a video, but then I wouldn't have it as a test card. So let's fire this guy up. Our temperature, let's uncheck all this garbage. Our temperature for the CPU is currently chilling, get it, at 47, and the test has just started. Which isn't very cool. I may not have gotten a good amount of thermal compound on the CPU this go around, or it's possible one of the H100i fans is. Nope, they are both spinning. But if I didn't get a good seal on it, it's okay. I still need to clean it thoroughly with some isopropyl alcohol and the appropriate cleaning tools, which I do have on order. They'll be getting to me soon. Unfortunately for now, I need the CPU to rest at under 60 degrees so that I can keep the stress test going. Uh-oh. Inching upward, we are at 54 now, and we're only a minute into it. Just making sure the H100i is in fact on. If the pump wasn't on, it could show similar signs like it's doing right now. We're at 57. One more degree and I'm going to click it off. I think we will get to 58 and I'll have to redo the CPU cooler. 58. Okay, and stop. Oh, it's staying warm. Yeah, it's still at... Okay, now it's going down to 50, sub 50s. That was strange. It definitely should not have gotten this warm. So I'm going to reseat the CPU cooler, make sure it's tight and everything, and make sure that we don't cook our brand new CPU. All right, I'm not sure how easy it is to see from this angle, but I did get a good amount of thermal compound on the CPU, just the right amount, almost a little too much, actually. So I'm confused as to why the system was not cooling properly. It's possible I didn't have enough pressure on the block attached to the CPU, or I didn't have it. I didn't have it mounted evenly. So I'm going to try remounting it without reapplying thermal compound and seeing if that gets us a better cooling job. Okay, I have reseated the CPU cooler, same as I did last time, but I'm just kind of hoping something went better this time. There is a method to this, and I've been following it the whole time, so I'm confused why we have this issue, but hopefully we won't have it this time. Okay, so something that I'm going to do this time, a bit differently from last, is I'm going to detach the H100i fans from the onboard fan controller from the H100i, which is set to low speeds to keep everything quiet, and I'm going to plug them straight into the, ooh, that was scary, into the chassis fan connectors on the motherboard and have it ramp them up to full so we can keep our temperatures perhaps just a little bit cooler. Unfortunately, my cables are just short enough to make this frustrating. Got one. And I think the second one won't be as much of a problem. Now, the H100i is probably internally freaking out. Dude, both my fans just died. But it's not going to matter for us right now. Alright, both fans are now spinning at a good volume, or at a good RPM. And the motherboard is telling all fans to be full on, which is fantastic. Let's reboot the system and get into Windows and run our stress test again. Okay, our CPU is already sitting at 42 degrees Celsius, which is about 10 degrees higher than I would have expected it to be. Usually, I recall this CPU wanting to hang around 30 to 35. So let's fire up this stress test again and see if we get any different results. We'll probably get the same results, and I'll need to reapply the thermal compound to the CPU. But other than that, I can't explain why we're getting temperatures this high. I just noticed something funny. This has happened before. IDA64 is reporting the CPU temp at 53 degrees, and I fired up CPU ID HW monitor, which I've used extensively in the past for just this sort of thing. CPU TN temperature input, I'm suspecting, is registering 54 degrees, which is probably what IDA64 is drawing from. But then I pulled up the FX8350, and the package temperature is 40 degrees Celsius, which is more along the lines of what I was expecting for this, which is goofy, and I'm not sure which one to trust at this moment in time. When I was looking at the system earlier, these heat sinks around the CPU, here, and there, are extremely warm, which is normal. But I suspect that it's taking readings from those locations. There are 4 thermal sensors on the board, it looks like. I'm not quite sure where they are. I'd have to get the diagram out, and I'm not even sure the manual would have that information. But right now, I'm thinking that we are gonna be okay to keep going with this stress test. I'm gonna do a quick Google search and make sure I'm not gonna fry something depending on which temperature sensor that I follow. Okay, so I've done my research and things are about what I was expecting, but I'm glad I have sort of relative verification on it now. So IDA64 is drawing from the CPU socket temperature, which is the CPU TN, which is reading 59-60 degrees Celsius. That's okay. The socket temperature can get, I believe, up to about 75 degrees before we need to start being concerned. And right now, there aren't any case fans on any part of the motherboard. except the CPU cooler itself. But that isn't cooling anything other than the CPU, obviously, because the fans are all the way over there. The actual CPU the CPU core temperature, the package temperatures hang in just above 43 degrees with the fans on full, which is cool. That's fine. We could run that up to like 50, 55, and I'd be okay with that. Which we'll have to do because the fans this loud is not practical. So I'm going to let this thing keep cooking. We're about 10 minutes into the stress test. I'm going to let it go for an hour or two or more before I consider it stable. But long term, cooling is important. You know, poor cooling kills computers, especially when you run them under intense workloads like I do. Like this computer would be rendering videos for sometimes days at a time without any breaks. And cooling is a very important factor in keeping those components alive. So plans down the road are to actually swap this 4U rack case for another one with better mounting options for fans and radiators. Perhaps moving even to a 5U case if that is better. And then installing enough fans to keep everything cool in the proper locations. And then actually remote mounting the system in another room in a server rack that contains my servers. And being able to crank the fans up to 10 and not worry about the noise in the recording area. That's way down the road. For now, if we continue to experience issues, something I might do is, in the case, if I can't point a fan directly at the heatsink components there, and there, I could, something I have done before is get little tiny fans that are, you know, barely bigger than the size of the heatsink, often USB powered, strap it down or otherwise secure it to the heatsinks and then run the USB power out so it powers on with the system, and that'll keep those select components cool. So, like I said before, we are now 15 minutes into the test, approximately. CPU hanging out at 40 degrees, CPU socket temperature a bit higher, but we're cool. I'm going to let this cook and see if we remain stable. Alright, so we are about 4 hours into the burn-in test, and the temperatures are still looking good, and the system is still looking stable. I'm pretty happy with this.
So here we are at the end of day 4. The computer has been running stable on a stress test for just under 4 hours now, which is double our previous record, and I'm relatively confident that we have found the issue, which turns out is the motherboard, probably the power delivery section of it relating to the processor. Which is great. I have another motherboard on hand that we're running right now. The final steps, which will come in the next episode, is to install that motherboard into the computer, do our final system checks, making sure everything is going well, do an extended stress test, and make sure everything is indeed working, and then reconfigure the system to our specifications to get it up and running for YouTube. So, there is light at the end of the tunnel, as long as the thing doesn't crash right behind me right now, but I'm relatively confident that we're okay at this point. If we're not, well, then we'll have a longer series than we anticipated. But I'm pretty happy right now as far as this project is concerned. I'm waiting for it to like blue screen behind me so I can add in the epic music or the jump scare sound effect. But before this episode ends, let me show you the final version of the MacBook quote-unquote portable gaming and editing config.
So it looks like I may not need this system and its Windows configuration for too much longer after all, but I'm glad that we got it put together. I learned a bit from assembling the system like this, and I'm glad that we did it. I made a few updates to the peripheral connections back here in the back. I have hooked up the main OS drive, that 500 gigabyte 860 EVO, by itself. Well, actually, it's still going into a small USB 3 hub right there, but it is the only device on it into one of the MacBook USB ports on the other side. So the OS drive has full bandwidth and full power. The rest of my peripherals and the other two drives, the games drive there and the scratch disk there, as well as all the peripherals, are going into this high-powered USB 3 hub. That is connecting everything to the other port. Through my disk speed tests, the SSDs were doing about 350, 400 megabyte reads and maybe 50 less on either of those writes. I figured one of those SSDs and the hard drive should be able to survive in a USB 3 link with all the low bandwidth peripherals and not oversaturate the link. Whereas the OS drive, I wanted on its own to keep the OS running, even if everything else slowed down a bit. So I'm pretty happy with the way this turned out. I'm actually uploading a YouTube video for the gaming channel currently, but I am overall quite happy.
So that is going to be it for the end of day 4. Good progress, like I said, but we are not quite done yet. There are still a few things that could go wrong, but hopefully the next episode will be the last of this series, and we won't need to purchase any more hardware or rip any more things apart. That is going to be it for today. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed. Drop a comment down below if you have any questions about what I've been talking about or would like something explained. And otherwise, I will see you all next time.